Hi there and welcome. Over the last decade or so, I have supported countless people with healthy behavioural change and getting rid of unwanted habits and addictive behaviours. And one of the things that I've learnt over that time is the carrot is always much more powerful than the stick. So what I mean by this is that people respond so much better with positive reinforcement rather than with punishment or deprivation or making them feel guilty or bad about the harmful habit or addictive behaviour. And I hope that's come across with this programme. It's actually inspired by one of the most famous behavioural scientists from the 20th century and his work, Mr. B.F. Skinner, with all of the different models that they used that proved that positive reinforcement is more effective with helping people to make changes in their behaviour. But I also wanted to, as well as this metaphor of the carrot and the stick, I also wanted to tell you the story about the dog and the bone. And just to illustrate that point. And then after we've gone through the story of the dog and the bone, we're going to do a quick exercise to see how you can put this into practice yourself. To help me illustrate why is it that positive reinforcement is more effective than punishment, I'm going to tell you the story of the dog and the bone. And I heard this myself when I was at a conference from somebody who was describing their own relationship with alcohol. Now, this person was saying to me that in the metaphor of the dog and the bone, they were like the dog and the alcohol was the bone. And if you imagine a dog that's really tightly holding onto a bone, and I have a dog at home myself, and if I was to try and pull the bone out of my dog's mouth, the harder I pull, the more my dog's going to resist and pull back at the bone and really struggle and put up a fight, be a bit oppositional, because she's a really stubborn Welsh Terrier and that's just in her nature. But the same is true actually of people. Sometimes when you try and force them to do something that they don't want to do, you try and pull away something that they perceive as good, it can actually sometimes provoke a resistance. And so I think that's important to acknowledge that sometimes when other people around us are trying to force us to do something that we don't want to do, we can resist that because we don't want to give up the bone. Now, what I've seen in my clinics sometimes is that people will come to see me in clinic when something bad has happened. And so in this metaphor, if you imagine trying to take the bone away from the dog, and if you suddenly clap your hands really loudly in front of the dog, or if you were to kind of shout at the dog or give the dog in trouble, the dog might transiently put the bone down because it's in shock. And it's thinking, oh gosh, I am in trouble. I'm getting punished here. And actually getting the dog to give up the bone in the short term is effective with punishment. And again, I've seen this in my clinics where somebody's maybe come along to see me because they've been arrested for drink driving, or there's been some kind of disciplinary work because of misconduct whilst under the influence of alcohol, or maybe their partner, husband or wife has kind of threatened to terminate the relationship, divorce them unless they seek help. Now, in this metaphor, that's like shouting at the dog or clapping your hands or even hitting the dog if you were to hit the dog. That kind of punishment is effective in the short term. But I want you to imagine my dog at home. What do you think my dog will do the minute my back's turned? My dog's dropped the bone because I've shouted at her. But what do you think she's going to do when my back's not turned? Or when she forgets about the punishment? And the same is true with us as people. And what you often see is punishment is really effective in the short term. But then when people don't feel in danger or under threat of the punishment anymore, they become complacent and they start to retest those boundaries again. And so, yes, that punishment, the shouting at the dog is effective in the short term. Yes, maybe the kind of disciplinary at work is effective in the short term, or the kind of the threat of losing your license or the threat of losing your relationship is effective in the short term, but it doesn't always successfully maintain that change behavior that you're looking for. So then let's think about a different approach with the dog. So if I was at home with my dog and I'm desperately trying to get the bone out of her mouth, or my shoe, or my slipper, or the remote controller, if whatever I'm trying to get out of my dog's mouth, and this happens, this is a common scenario, a much more effective way of me to kind of get the dog to release the bone is to offer her something better than the bone. And so if I was to offer the dog a piece of steak and to repeatedly offer the dog a piece of steak instead of the bone, she's not going to go back to the bone when she's got steak. She's going to happily drop that bone, that dry, nasty bone, and be delighted to accept the steak, which is much better at meeting her underlying need of hunger and flavour and taste, because it's better. It's a better option. It's like the carrot versus the stick. And so the same is true of people when we've got these addictive habits and harmful behaviours. One of the things that I think is really helpful is understanding what's the underlying need that alcohol is serving. If it's boredom or loneliness, or if it's anxiety or insomnia, what's going to be better than the bone? What's going to be better than the alcohol at meeting that underlying need? And so this is again where we're thinking about our if and then plans and thinking about what the underlying need is. What's a better way? So if it's boredom, how could you entertain yourself? What's more entertaining than drinking? Could you go rock climbing? Could you go to the movies? Could you call a friend? If you're feeling anxious, is there a better way of meeting that underlying need than alcohol? Again, thinking about, if the alcohol's like the bone, it's a temporary fix, it's all right. What's a better way? What's going to be like the steak that's going to be kind of more flavoursome, more filling? What's going to be better than the bone? So for anxiety, maybe it's, maybe it's as simple as just doing a breathing exercise or engaging in some mindfulness, or maybe it's about doing some cognitive training exercises like we have here in the Curb Toolkit, or maybe it's actually seeking professional support and seeing a doctor, talking about medication if that's appropriate, or face-to-face talking therapy. But again, I wanted to share this story and this metaphor just to try and illustrate that sometimes punishment can be effective in the short term. The threat of punishment and the threat of what we might lose is effective in the short term. And it's important to acknowledge these things with our drinking behaviours. But actually, in order to effect long-term, sustainable, healthy change, it's really important to also think about the positives, what the carrot is, what the steak is. And I'm sorry if that upsets people, if anybody's vegetarian or vegan. What's going to be better than the bone? And so this is an exercise I want you to do yourself just now. So I want you to do this exercise with me. And there's 4 questions in this exercise. First question: what is the underlying need which alcohol is serving for you? Second question: is there a better way of meeting and serving that underlying need than alcohol? My third question, just to help, is to consider, what did you do before you drank alcohol or drank so heavily? Can you cast your mind back? Were there any activities or hobbies, things that you used to do that used to serve this underlying need? And the fourth part of this exercise, my fourth kind of final challenge to you, is I want you to draw a timetable across the week. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, morning, afternoon, evening. And in this timetable, I want you to schedule activities which meet this underlying need at the times where you think it'll be convenient for you to do these activities, and when these activities will be most helpful to address that underlying need. I've talked about different metaphors for sustaining healthy behavioural change. We've talked about the virtue and the value of the carrot over the stick. We've talked about the dog and the bone, and why actually giving the dog a steak is often better than the bone, and why reward and celebration long term is more effective than punishment and shame. And finally, I've given you this exercise where I've asked you to really understand and identify what's the underlying need that alcohol is serving, What is a better way of serving that underlying need? Are there any old habits or behaviours or activities that you used to engage in that previously met that underlying need? And then finally, how can you build these into your weekly routine and schedule?